Welcome back to Mr. Scare. For today's episode, I have a compilation of 5 scary truck driving horror stories. But before I begin reading, I want you to smash the like button and subscribe to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I was driving my truck across the state highway in the middle of the night. It was deserted, but it was not much surprising to me. Since I had traveled through this route on a couple of occasions, I knew that it usually gets lonely at night. Anyway, it does not matter much to me since it is barely a 4-hour-long drive. So I was driving as usual. However, there was one thing a little out of the ordinary. I saw a man ask for a lift. He was a hitchhiker, and I have a strict self-decided policy toward hitchhikers. I never stop for them. And I do feel guilty about it, but I prefer to not put myself at risk. So I saw this man stand at the corner turn, asking for a lift. He didn't say much. I was driving downhill and the road was curvy. I saw him at the first turn and just noticed him. He had his hand out, but I did not see it at first. I continued driving along the curve. Now the road was actually a zigzag downhill. So I knew I could see him again once I drive my truck past it. I kept an eye on him because I had to see him stand on the elevated ground. But he was not there. To my surprise, he was on my level. He had probably jumped a level down and reached the side of my road. His sudden appearance had caught me off guard, and so I was noticing his actions or movements. If he was so quick in jumping or making his way down the elevated ground, he could have easily pounced on my truck and climbed on it. But he didn't. As I moved past him, he just stood there with his hand stretched out. But I didn't stop. I kept driving at the same speed, or maybe slightly faster. I shrugged it off and continued on my path. As my truck made a turn around the corner, I noticed that I was going to cross the same path again, on lower ground. You see, I was still making my way downhill. I kept a close eye on the spot where I last saw him, but he was not there. I quickly looked under the same spot, assuming he again made his way down the slope and waited at the side, but he was not there. In fact, he was not visible anywhere. I relaxed and continued on my path. The idea of the stranger asking for a ride made me uncomfortable, especially considering how he never spoke a word. He just put his hand out and stood like an emotionless statue. I decided to move on since I was almost more than halfway downhill. And it was almost impossible for him to show up now, especially knowing that he was not seen for the last few minutes, despite the road that went through the same hill. I resumed the music and decided to move on. I was on a notoriously accident-prone route, and it was dark. My priority should be to keep an eye on the road, and not for the creepy hitchhiker dude. The road was bumpy, so I drove slowly for the next few minutes. The last thing I wanted at that moment was to not have a punctured tire. So I kept driving as safely and slowly as possible. As I made the turn around the curve, I saw the man again. He was standing on the side of the road. As usual, he had his hand stretched out. Not a single expression over his face. I was paranoid. It was impossible that he had made his way downhill in such a short time, and that too with ease. He was not even panting. I accelerated along the curve and zoomed past him. He did not say a word. I looked back to see what he did after my truck passed. I wanted to know if he immediately rushes downhill. But to my surprise, he was not there. He was missing. I gasped, realizing that the road was empty, as if he never stood there asking for the ride. I faced ahead to see the road, and I saw him stand right ahead of my truck. And before I could apply my brakes, my truck dashed into him, and he landed with a loud thump on the floor behind. I was scared to the core, but I did not stop. I decided to keep driving, and I did. For the next few miles, I pressed the gas and went on at the maximum possible speed that I could go on over the terrain. Later, I saw a patrolling car. I parked beside him and approached the patrolling officer. After narrating the entire incident to him, he plainly looked at me and asked me to ignore it. I was stunned. I mean, I had just crashed and hit a man on the road. and he did not care about it. He later explained that I was not the only one. Many drivers had experienced the same thing. The main positive thing that I did was that I did not stop to give him a ride. He claimed that the entity I encountered was not a human. It was a trickster. A trickster who has tricked and led many unwary travelers crashing downhill. The road was not much dangerous, but the trickster was indeed. I was on a road trip with my buddies. My dad's truck was available, and so we hopped onto it for an adventure. It was summertime, and we had planned to hit the road. Now I am not a fan of night drives, but the idea of driving on the highway, and that too in the middle of the night, is a little exciting. Yes, I was well aware of the risks. Apart from the fact that it is always dangerous to drive at night, there is always an additional risk of criminals or animals lurking around. The highway that we were on was not much busy that night. So we were driving casually, and partying too. We were drinking and screaming while driving. But again, the highway was empty and we were not disturbing anybody. Amidst the loud music, suddenly we heard a loud thumping sound. And the noise from the truck's engine stopped out of nowhere. We drove to the side as the engine slowly came to a still. Out of all possibilities that could go wrong, the truck had decided to break down. That too in the middle of a highway. The 5 of us got off the truck and waited for the call to connect. But the network was so poor that none of us was getting any reception on our devices. 2 of my friends tried to figure out the issue, but to no avail. And that is when the real trouble began. A car approached us and slowed down. We told him about the problem, and he offered help. He said he wouldn't risk getting off his car. So we trusted him. No sane man would stop his car in the middle of the highway for anyone else. He offered a ride to the nearest gas station. We could find some help there. So one of my friends got inside the car and he drove off. We had our doubts, but we waited for him to return. About 15 minutes later, we got restless because there were no signs of him. I opined that the 4 of us could walk in the direction of the gas station. But we couldn't leave my dad's vehicle alone. He was supposed to drive it to work a day later. I know it sounds dumb, but we decided to split up. 2 of us stayed back, while the other 2 walked toward the station. As we stayed back, I sensed that we had taken a risky decision. But now it was too late. We were alone in the middle of a highway. There was a forest on one side and barren land on the other. After waiting for over another 15 minutes, we started to panic. I could also hear an occasional sound coming from the woods. It was the sound of some movement along with the trees. My friend Phil panicked too. We knew that if it was a creature in the woods, we could not even outrun it. So we rushed inside the truck and locked the doors. The lights were already out. So we kept looking for anything moving nearby. As we saw a bobcat make its way, we froze in our spots. Its green eyes could scare off anyone. We were in the truck, so we were not in that big of a danger. But if the bobcat spots us, then we might get in trouble. We were already panting with less air inside the powerless vehicle. The bobcat loitered on the highway and kept looking around. I slipped a little low so that only my eyes and forehead could be visible to the bobcat. Phil had not moved for the last 5 minutes. He kept updating me about its position despite knowing that I was watching it. His brain had shut down. He screamed and panicked as his eyes met the bobcat's eyes. It changed its demeanor. It started walking toward us and we did not know what to do. We stayed put inside. We knew it would be difficult for it to break the glass. As it pushed its face into the window, Phil slammed the glass. The curious bobcat was now irritated and infuriated. It had taken it as a challenge. The bobcat kept scratching the glass, but to no avail. We let out a sigh of relief and even joked about it. Phil went a step further and teased it from inside. Suddenly, the bobcat leaped above us and stood on the roof. We could sense a dent forming on the top. The roof of this semi-old truck was not strong enough to sustain its weight. We were really scared. We did not know what to do. We decided to stay calm. Phil tried to bang the roof from the inside to scare off the bobcat. But it didn't budge. It stayed up. In fact, it peeped above the window from the opposite side. It knew that we were trapped inside. Phil panicked as the bobcat gave a strong blow to the window. We thought it broke, but it didn't. But yes, there was a crack. A big crack. This only meant one thing. The window could sustain one, or at most two such blows. Then it would break. The bobcat attacked again and some parts of the glass chipped off. Phil panicked and dashed outside on the highway. The bobcat took a moment to understand what was happening. It leaped toward philosophy. I opened my door and threw a can at it. I knew it made no sense, but I was trying to buy Phil some time. There was no way that he was going to outrun a wild animal in a chase. The bobcat hissed at me but turned and moved toward philosophy. He kept running and closed his eyes as a bright light zoomed towards him. The bobcat too stopped in its track and escaped into the woods. It took a moment to see that the headlights were of a car that our friends were returning from. They were back after almost an hour. And had they not reached on time, Phil would have not survived at all. And on a side note, I am never going to drive at night across a highway. And if I ever have to, I am never going to let us split up. If I remember correctly, I was somewhere in Missouri when this happened. I had driven my truck for 6 or 7 hours at a stretch, and I needed a short break. So I stopped at an off-ramp to stretch out and take a breather. As I pulled out and started smoking a cigarette, a little girl from some direction I couldn't figure out giggled loudly and said,
"Hi, sir."
I was stunned by her sudden sound and appearance. My initial reaction was, what the hell is a little kid doing out here at this time? This was mainly because it was about to get dark soon, and there were no houses visible nearby. I looked around to spot any cars parked, but there were none. So I tried to figure that out first. I talked back to her and said hi. She then responded to my hi with,
"My mom says that you will be okay, so you don't have to worry."
Now I was utterly confused and puzzled by what the little girl had just said. I asked her what she meant by what she just said, but I got no response from her. She just stood there, looking at me and not moving a lip. Then all of a sudden, I feel like somebody was standing next to me, but it did not feel negative or bad at all. It just felt like somebody was present right there, standing next to me. I could sense what was going on, but I did not panic. Plus, being a trucker, I had been in such situations before. Since it didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished my cigarette at my regular pace, and then got into my truck and left the place. Later, when I was down the road, I realized that I had forgotten to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on. So I scrambled to look at my GPS and searched for the nearest truck stop. I found one and set the course. As I rolled up to the truck stop, my truck started sputtering, and I barely made it to the fuel line before the truck started to die. I ran out of fuel right as I got on the fuel line. It wasn't until I was fueling up that it occurred to me what the hell happened at my last stop. A chill ran down my spine as I realized. It was probably the spirit of the mother that told the little kid, who was a spirit too I suppose, that my fuel tank was about to be empty. But that I would be okay. Okay enough to make it to the next gas station. And she was right. It is experiences like these that actually make you rethink the possibilities of this world. I mean, I have seen creatures and things in the sky. Those stories can be made up by anyone. But this, it hits differently. Thank you, little kid and her mother. I hope you two rest in peace. As a seasoned trucker, I've seen truck drivers duke it out so many times while waiting for their turn in the fuel line. I have also seen brawls happen in the back of truck stops. Not only that, but I have also seen many rookies hitting other trucks by accident. I mean, you name it, and I've seen it all. The most memorable fight that I had ever seen was when I was on a trip with a co-driver whom we shall say, our partnership fell apart really fast on the way home. In Arizona, I stop at a truck stop between Flagstaff and the California state line. After an eternity, I finally decided to pull up on the fuel line. I fuel up and go inside to take a shit and get something to drink and snack on. I come back and the sleeper curtain is open, no co-driver. 30 to 45 minutes go by and he comes out. That's cool, take your time because I ain't stopping from here on out. Get it all out now. I put some trash in a couple of bags and put it on the floor. It was mostly his trash from his shift prior that I couldn't stand having in the cabin anymore. He opens the door and dumps the bags on the ground. So I lit his butt up with all the fury that I could muster up. 2 garbage cans 20 feet away. Holy shit, no. I go put the bags in the trash cans and come back to the truck. As I'm doing my logbook, I look up and glance at my mirror. I see 2 drivers flapping wings at each other getting into a fist fight. Oh good, a fight, let's watch. Sorry, but I enjoy watching some action drama. Suddenly they go at it like baboons. Fists flying, but they're not landing any hits. Then one of the drivers picks up the trash cans and throws it at the other driver that can hit him square in the face and blows open with paper towels going all over the place. WWE just rolled into town apparently. So I got out and started walking back to watch, and apparently, every other driver on the fuel line had the same idea. The driver who got trash canned reached into the storage compartment in his truck and pulls out a huge chain with a big-ass padlock on it. He swung it furiously as he was coming back to the front of the truck where the trash canner is. Mr. Chain Gang takes out the pump, takes out his driver's side window, knocks the mirror off his truck, puts a huge gouge in his fender, and then makes it to the trash canner. The guy runs around the other side of the fuel pump, grabs the squeegee, and starts beating Chain Gang with it. All it does is get the guy wet and piss him off more. So now it's a battle of melee weapons. Enough time rolls by that they realize neither weapon of choice is doing any good, so in an epic sequence of moves, they bear hug the living fuck out of each other and flop to the ground and start bicycling each other. I walk inside and tell the lady that there's a fight on the fuel line, and she bolts out the door and breaks them up, like a chaperone breaking up 2 kids fighting on the playground. All this because supposedly Chain Gang said some shit to Trash Canner's wife. His argument was that he didn't do shit, she just walked up and started picking a fight. I believe the chain gunner more than the trash can guy. But why do I care? I had seen some Netflix-level drama before my shift. When it comes to my scariest truck driving memory, I'm always reminded of the last time I was driving to New Mexico. That day, I was coming from Colorado to New Mexico. It was a long day, and after driving for over 4 long hours, I generally take a short break to loosen up. I parked on the side, took a piss, and stretched all my muscles. I had specifically stopped at an off-ramp, mainly to shut down for some sleep. At first, I had some trouble falling asleep. It had to do with the risks that I was putting myself into. I had heard so many accounts of my fellow drivers where they had stopped at such random spots, and then woken up to being attacked by some animal, or burglars, or some creepy unexplainable phenomenon. But I really needed some rest. And a quick short one to be honest. I was not planning on sleeping for hours. All I needed was a power nap. So I set alarm for 15 minutes and dozed off. Before sleeping, I did make sure that the windows were closed and the doors were locked tight. Maybe it was the fatigue, but I slipped into sleep in a jiffy. Not sure how long had passed, but when I opened my eyes, it was getting a little dark. More importantly, I woke up to a car pulling up behind me and turning off its lights. I started getting this really eerie feeling that I needed to get the hell out of Dodge. I decided to not make any panic-stricken movements. I did not want to alarm them at all. So I stayed put in my position. I kept a close eye on the movements of the car behind me. Not the car, of course, but the driver inside. But for some reason or the other, I could not see anyone around. The windshield was a darker tint, so I couldn't see if anyone was inside. But never mind. I did not care as long as no one moved out with a weapon or something. After a couple of minutes, I leaped into the driver's seat, started the truck, and started hauling it onto the highway. As I was taking off, I looked into the driver's side mirror and saw that somebody was standing by the side of the trailer. It was in the blind spot, so I couldn't spot him before. My chicken lights were the only way I was able to see him. I chugged on down to the rest area about 15 miles down the road, and I decided that I will never stop on random points again. My story was nothing as compared to what others have been through. And maybe if I would have not woken up in time, the man would have attacked me or stolen something from the trailer. Just never stop.